Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining GFI's quarterly Building Your Alt Protein Career webinar. I'm really glad you've joined us. My name is Asia Sheehab, and I'm an academic community specialist here at the Good Food Institute, or GFI. And I will pass it over to our featured guests shortly. But for those of you who may be new to the GFI community, I just wanted to share a quick introduction about who we are and what we do. And if this is your first time with us, I would highly encourage you to just spend some time after this call exploring the many free resources that are on our website, gfi.org, which includes everything from technical reports and blogs to a free online course about alternative protein science, and specific ways that you can get involved in one of our many alt protein communities. And just to take a step back, the purpose of this quarterly call is to share resources and stories that can really support anyone who is interested or exploring an alternative protein career path and learn directly from alternative protein professionals who are working in the field and industry. It's really the perfect place to gather career insights from personal experiences and gain those actionable pieces of advice based on specific steps that different folks have taken to navigate this newer space of alternative proteins, the job market, and also how they've gone about building a fulfilling and meaningful career. So after I introduce GFI and briefly call out a new resource that is live on our website, I'll introduce Dr. Bryan Quoc who is joining us today to share about his career path in food science and consulting. And then we will have quite a bit of time for questions from you all. So if there's anything that you already know you want to ask, feel free to share it in the Q&A. There's a designated Q&A chat. Or you can share your questions throughout the presentation or at the very end, and we'll make sure to get to them. Alrighty, let's get started. So the Good Food Institute, or GFI, is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to developing the roadmap for a sustainable, secure, and just protein supply. We are funded entirely by philanthropy, and our generous donors allow us to work towards this vision in three areas of focus. So I am part of our science and technology team, where we work to advance foundational open access research in alternative proteins, and ensure that there's a thriving research and education and training ecosystem. Our corporate engagement team partners with companies and investors across the globe to really drive investment and accelerate innovation and ultimately scale the supply chain for this industry. And finally, we have our policy team, and their main focus is to advocate for fair policy and public research funding for alternative proteins. I'm coming to you from the US team, but I wanted to mention that we have the privilege of working with a global team of experts. We have our affiliates in Brazil, Europe, Israel, India, the Asia Pacific region, and as of last year, Japan as well. And what motivates our work at GFI is the fact that our current system for producing meat, dairy, and eggs is extremely unsustainable and just inefficient. This system really exacerbates climate change, environmental degradation, antibiotic resistance, as well as global food insecurity and issues of animal welfare. And despite more and more people learning about this issue, as I'm sure many of you are aware of, which is why you're joining today, we're not yet seeing enough individuals changing the way that they eat. And actually, instead, per capita, we see meat consumption continuing to rise globally. So instead of asking consumers to completely give up the foods that they know and love, we believe that the solution lies in making products that are just as tasty and affordable as conventional meat without relying on such intensive resources. So here are a few ways to produce alternative proteins. We can use plants, we can use fermentation or microbes, or we can cultivate it from actual animal cells. If you want to learn more about each pillar of alternative proteins, I highly recommend going to gfi.org/science, which is where you can really take a deep dive into the science and stay current with the research that's being done in this field every single day. On that note, I also wanted to shout out that we have our annual State of Alternative Proteins series. These are live on gfi.org/state of alternative proteins. Every year, our industry, policy, and science experts on the GFI team put their heads together and create these reports that help to contextualize the latest scientific advancements, the market trends, the consumer research, the regulatory developments across cultivated fermentation and plant-based proteins. This series includes all three of those production platforms. We have state of the industry reports, state of global policy reports, and a new type of report that we just modeled this year called our State of Alternative Proteins report, which really focuses on sharing stories about the people and the places that are advancing alternative proteins. So definitely take a look at any or all of those reports. In addition to reading reports and staying up to date on the field, I also know that you're probably here today to actually learn more about how you can take part in this field by contributing your skills and expertise in various ways. And this is why I'm really excited to introduce our guest speaker today, who will be sharing his unique story and steps to building a career in food science and consulting, and how he's applied his background and expertise to the field of alternative proteins. Dr. Bryan Quoc is the founder and principal food consultant at Mendocino Food Consulting. He earned his PhD in food science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and his Bachelor of Science and Master's of Science in Chemistry from the University of California, Irvine. He has consulted with food companies and organizations in the alternative protein space, including Black Sheep Foods, Turtle Tree, our very own Good Food Institute, High Time Foods, and many others. He is also the author of the book 150 Food Science Questions Answered, and holds 3 patents in the fields of food technology and agriculture. He currently lives on the beautiful coast of Mendocino, California, with his wife and 2 dogs. Bryan, we are so happy and grateful to have you with us today. I will pass it over to you.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story. Hi everyone. So I'm Bryan Quoc, and I'm here to share a little bit about how I got into alternative proteins. And like any good story, there's a lot of ups and downs, and I certainly have gone through a number of different changes and sort of identity crises, if you will. And luckily, I think in the end, I sort of stumbled. I failed forward, as people like to say. So I'm more than happy to share sort of how that got started. So you can see that this is my timeline, and there's a lot of different events that sort of happened in my life that I felt got me closer and closer to where I am today. It looks linear. It looks linear. There's absolutely no linearity to it. I definitely is more like looking back on my life and trying to make a pattern out of what happened. But like most people who sort of get into the sciences, I started college. I was always really good at chemistry, and I ended up going to UC Irvine because I did like a science fair project there, and I met a few professors, and there was really great experience, and I really loved the campus. Of course, did my classwork, got my awards, got my honors. Um, but at some point, I was a little like kind of rebellious, and I really I was really struggling to really find my path as an academic, because sometimes you just kind of feel like you're pigeonholed. So I also ended up going to Burning Man a couple times as an undergraduate, and that was a really eye-opening. If you don't know, Burning Man is sort of like a large art festival in the desert. It happens once a year, and a lot of interesting things happen there. Um, but yeah, I mean, definitely kept, doing well in school, but I got very lost. I was really good at chemistry, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do with it. I certainly knew I didn't want to do polymer research. I didn't want to do medicinal research. I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do later in life. And this got exasperated because my dad passed away when I was a junior. This is his marker. And yeah, that really affected me because he was a doctor and he was sort of the intellectual in the family. And I always looked up to him. And he was almost always kind of the beacon for me as far as what I wanted to do in my life, even though, it's kind of like, do I want to be a doctor? Do I want to be, well, a scientist? I'm not entirely sure. But he was my inspiration. And when he passed, and then I completed my bachelor's, it was a little strange because I actually spent my entire academic career like aiming to get into Stanford for a PhD program in chemistry. But I just wasn't feeling it. And I ended up actually deferring for 1 year. And what I ended up doing was deciding to walk across the country instead of go to graduate school. And I think I really did that because one, I wanted to commemorate and honor my dad. And the second reason was because I was so stuck in academics and trying to get better grades and just be really competitive. And then I realized like at the end of the day, like life can just sort of happen in a moment. And I really wanted to just reset, so to speak. So I ended up walking about 6 months from UC Irvine, which is funny because there's a dormitory complex called Middle Earth, and I started at the Shire. And I really like that story because it's just, it just kind of embedded in me this idea of like making that journey. I ended up within 6 months, I ended up landing in Louisiana. And it was an interesting journey because at the time, I really didn't have any idea about food or anything like that. I was very much a utilitarian eater, but you can only eat so much peanut butter and nuts and dried fruit or whatever day after day after day until you get sick of it. So I ended up actually spending a lot of time in grocery stores and looking at labels, and because there's also air conditioning. And so I would go up and down the aisles, and I would try to explore food a little bit more and try to see if I could improve the flavors of what I was eating. This is actually a cart that I had that I pushed around. So this is actually a photo of what I did. You can see in the foreground, there's like, a box of nuts and like I think that's oats, if I remember correctly. Like it was just very basic food supply. But yeah, and then I just, when you're trying to eat 3,500 to 4,000 calories, it gets very monotonous very fast. So that became, and of course, this is a picture of me. Um, yeah, that became a central part of my walk. This idea of like, what is all this? Like, why is food so important? And it bugged me a lot. I ended up spending about 3 months at Stanford when I came back, and I realized it wasn't for me. So I dropped out. And then I started meandering a little bit. I went back to school at UC Irvine to get my master's. I was thinking about getting into teaching. But it took a little bit of time. I eventually, after getting my master's degree, And then I taught a little bit, like as part of another program. I realized teaching high school was not for me very quickly. I briefly worked at Caltech at the Joint Center for Artificial Photosynthesis. Again, I was like, yeah, maybe this really isn't for me. Like I needed something different. And I came back to food. And at some point, I wandered into a university library and I found a journal about flavor chemistry and food science. And I started reading it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is an academic field. Because in my 23 years up to then, I had no idea that food science was a field. And once I got that, it clicked. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna apply now. I'm gonna go back and do my PhD in food science. Which was an interesting ask from my now wife because she was like, "Really, you're gonna go back and give it another shot?" I was like, "Yes, yes, I'm gonna try again." So I applied. I got into all my schools, but I ended up deciding on University of Wisconsin-Madison, primarily because I really just liked the resources that they had, and also there's a lot of other factors. For example, like my wife's family was there, like some of them, and her cousins who lived there. He was a professor of mathematics, so it just felt like it was a lot easier to sort of integrate into the university setting versus the other programs I got into. Um, Now, it's interesting because I talk a lot about flavor, but my PhD program, or the dissertation work that I was doing was only tangentially related. I was studying garlic and onions, and I was actually studying the flavor compounds in them, but I was investigating the biological effects they had. But of course, I'm someone that gets bored very easily, so I ended up reading a ton about flavors, particularly savory flavors, and umami, and I really got very interested in the whole concept of flavor perception. Um, and I started learning about flavor chemists, and I learned about the whole flavor industry, and I just thought the whole thing was really fascinating. Um, and so while I was doing my dissertation, I was just studying all this stuff, and eventually, at some point, I connected with the Institute of Food Technologists, and they had some student openings for writing for their blog. And yeah, I just sort of started pouring all that information that I'd read into the blog. I started writing all these articles about flavor. I got really into it. And then at some point, I was asked to manage the blog, and then I eventually got asked to sort of oversee all the social media for that particular branch of this student association at IFT. And it was really fun because I got to collaborate with all the graduate students that were in different fields of food science and learn from them. I also got to see the metrics of the website and the blog. And that actually helped me a lot because then I started to learn what worked and what didn't as far as communicating and writing about food science. And I got so good at some point. Um, let's see if I even have a picture. So I finished my PhD. But while I was finishing up my PhD, I also, because I was optimizing so much about my blog or this blog, a publisher reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to write a book on food science, which was really crazy. So yeah, I ended up writing this book while I was finishing my dissertation. I I don't recommend it. That is not a recommended pathway. But I mean, I just couldn't give up on that opportunity because I'd always wanted to write a book, and I thought maybe 5 or 10 years down the road I would write a book. But here was the opportunity and chance, so I did that. I spent my days writing my dissertation and my nights writing this book, and I'd like swap back and forth. Like when I got bored of writing the book, I'd write my dissertation, and when I write my dissertation, I'd swap back to the book. And eventually both got I submitted both. This got published in July, and then I defended in August. So it was just like a really wild time. Um, but it was really cool because even while I was writing this book, people kind of heard about me in the grapevine. Like just like I had relationships, for example, like my cousin, she introduced me to a company that was doing flavors, because her friend worked there. But they heard that I was writing this book. So then they asked me like, can you write some technical stuff for us? So I did that. Um, and I was just doing all these like little small projects while I was doing all these different things. Um, but after I graduated, my wife ended up getting a position in Washington in the middle of nowhere, a small town called Squim, which is on the Olympic Peninsula. Here's a much more detailed map. You can see it's like in the middle of nowhere. Like this is like the tippy top of the United States. And there's no the population is like 5,000. There's no one there, right? So there's no food companies, there's nothing. So I decided this was a good time and chance for me to attempt to kind of keep doing what I've been doing, which is connecting with startup companies in the food industry and discussing what exactly it is that they need and see if I can help. Um, and it turned out that it was a great way for me to get my foot in the door with consulting. I started building out this really funky lab in my this is just a picture. This is not my actual lab. Mine's even worse. But I was building out a food development lab in my garage, which was I really loved that garage, because it was me putting a lot of personality into the work that I was doing, and I was able to do a lot of different formulation work. I was able to do more writing consulting, and like marketing of technical stuff. It was just a lot of fun. And one of the projects, I mean, these are a lot of the different companies that I've been able to work with over the years, and I've been really lucky to do so. Primarily, Turtle Tree was actually my first client. So they do cultivated. Well, I guess now they do precision fermented lactoferrin, which is one of the proteins in milk, which has anti-inflammatory properties. So it's a nutraceutical. But in the beginning, they were considering doing cultivated milk, right? Like using cells to mammalian cells to produce milk. And I was their main blog writer, and then they were my first like long-term client, and I'm grateful for them because they took a chance on me. And I remember sending out all these emails in the beginning to all these different startups, and some people would respond, but they didn't have any need. But they were the first ones to say, it'd be great for you to do the writing for us. And I did. And I was really grateful for them because that helped set me up for future projects. Another great uh, client that I had was Black Sheep Foods, and they do plant-based sheep or lamb, I believe. And they actually asked me to help them develop their flavors, which was one of my first remote product development project. It was really fascinating to see like me consulting on how to create a meaty flavor using plant-based ingredients, but without actually doing anything. Or I was doing a lot of reading. I think that was really what I was doing, a lot of research and trying to evaluate like what factors improve the flavor profile, what can they do to sort of enhance the intensity of it. And it was a wild time. And then there's all these other groups that I worked with that they definitely, I would say they took a chance on me, but I also delivered, right? So that's the important thing is like if people give you the opportunity, you do have to work hard to sort of kind of meet their standard. But in the end of the day, like I think industry has a different standard, which is about efficiency and being fast. And it's less about like you can get 80% of the way there. We don't need all the like the 20% details. Um, but yeah, I mean it was eye-opening for me to be able to do that. Um, and then one of the so this is the craziest story, which is um what ended up happening or in 2021 was that I got reached out. Oh, sorry. I so Ryan Dowdy, who used to work at GFI, he reached out to me. Um, I think it was through one of those third party platforms, and he asked if I would want to submit a proposal for a project that they were doing at GFI. And the craziest thing is that actually I had known about Ryan Dowdy maybe 6 years prior. And before I'd started my PhD in food science, I was actually reading up on his work while he was an intern at NASA. And then eventually he ended up getting a position at NASA. But I was always following his work because I was so fascinated by the stuff that he was doing. And he just kind of became this inspiration to me as a food scientist. I was like, oh, this is so cool. And he also had a sort of a non-conventional trajectory. Like he started off with an English degree, right? Like this. So he was a huge inspiration. But here I am, like 6 years later, doing my like little tiny consulting, and he reaches out from GFI, which also again, like GFI was, I was like, oh, it would be so great. Like maybe 10 years down the road, I can work with GFI, right? Like it was like one of those things, like aspirational. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of weird. Like the guy that is kind of an inspirational figurehead, and also this organization that's a bit of an inspiration. Now they're reaching out to me like maybe a year after I started this consulting, and they want me to submit a proposal, which was crazy. And it was the biggest, it remains the biggest project that I've ever done. Um, but it was awesome because I think he saw something in what I was doing, and I of course was like, yeah, this is awesome. So when I submitted the proposal, and I worked really hard because I was like, now I have two people, I have two groups that I have to impress, like this guy and then also GFI. Um, but when he called and he was like, we have accepted your proposal and we have awarded you. It was like like I was so happy. I mean, it was insane. The level of, I don't know. I couldn't really believe it. It's one of those sort of dream scenarios. And I was really grateful that he reached out because I would have never known, right? Like so some of these things just happen, and it's unclear exactly how. I think, for me, I just put myself out there. I was constantly talking to people. There's just all these different opportunities to connect and build relationships. Um, so yeah, we worked, everyone worked together on that. It took about 2 years to get that put together, and I learned a lot. Like I wasn't entirely sure if I could do it, to be honest, because my skill set as a PhD student had very little to do with this was. But what I think I knew was I was confident enough to go out and get the resources I needed in order to make this happen. And I think that was more important at the end of the day, because most projects, especially as nebulous as consulting, require you to really find information. And I think that's what I got really good at. It was finding information and putting it together and organizing it. And I think that's, at the end of the day, I realized that's what I was doing. That was the skill set I was developing, was taking information that's really dense, really technical, putting it together in a way that's easy to understand in a format that conveys information very quickly for people that may not have a science background, investors, business people, executives, and so on and so forth. And that played really well into being able to put this project out. So it got published, and you know, I got to do a little webinar about it, and it was just really nice There was definitely some moments where I was like, I don't know how I can do this. This is a lot. Like, there's that like even in the beginning, one of the challenges was that we weren't able to get the data that we needed from the stakeholders. Like I would do interviews with different companies and everything would be under NDA or like they couldn't share it or they didn't have metrics. And like I was like, oh my gosh, like this project is gonna be so hard. So that at some point I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna do it. I'm just gonna construct the data. Like I'm just gonna, hobble it from like different databases, and I was able to make a really very smooth analysis. So like it's not like I knew what I was doing, but there was some inspirations along the way. And I think at the end of the day, it's okay to fail. I think that was the other thing that I learned to do was, you know, with the PhD programs, there's definitely a lot of hardship and heartache. I'd never written a book, so I tried that, and there was definitely a lot of mistakes that I made. And I think learning to just make mistakes is probably a really good skill set to have because even in, we can talk about this field of alternative proteins, which is completely new and people are still trying to work it out. So you can come in with sort of like you mindset. But I think that's true for a lot of life. And if you're trying to develop something, or innovate something, or do research, it's always going to be a function of, yeah, I probably feel kind of dumb right now. Well, because you're the only one doing it, right? That getting that feeling and being comfortable with that is probably one of my number one skills that I feel like I've developed over the years, besides the hard skills of writing and science communication. And so I was doing all that for past 5 years. But last year, my mom passed away very suddenly, and she actually got hit by a car while she was biking, and that really impacted me because she actually was one of my inspirations for building a business. She was a big entrepreneur. She had started a lot of different businesses while I was growing up. And I learned a lot from her, and especially she was sort of like an advisor for me, where just telling me like how to market and explain to me like in very basic terms like how to do finances and that sort of thing. So I think thanks to her, I was able to get through a lot of rough patches. But after she passed, I really decided to take the next step and I've instead of working by myself, I've decided to sort of expand my consulting and work with more of a team. Partially because I since then it's been hard for me to sort of focus, and I realized that while I do still love doing the technical work and the writing and all that, I'm actually probably where I'm really good is talking to people, and I love building relationships. And I realized that's the thing that I really wanted to do was build relationships, work on more of the creative side of this consulting business. And to that end, um, me and my wife decided to move back to California. I don't know why this was in Sacramento. It's not supposed to be Sacramento. It's supposed to be Mendocino. Mendocino is north of Napa Valley, so it's fairly close to the Bay Area, but about like 3 hours. But it's a small town. It's like this small New England town. By the ocean, by the beach. And one of the really fascinating things about Mendocino is that it's one of the most temperate regions in the United States. And that happens to make it very good for growing mushrooms because it kind of sits at 55 degrees Fahrenheit. And behind me, if I unblur this, I've got a bunch of buckets of mushrooms. So one of the things I've been getting really into is sort of mycology and try to understand fungi. And then one of the other things about Mendocino is that it's very close to Anderson Valley, which is one of the between Napa Valley and Anderson Valley. They're the sort of biggest wine regions in California. And then more recently, as far as the creative aspect, I was asked to do a documentary for flavors very recently, and that's what I did last week. And so it's these sort of like, and that happened like very randomly. Like this documentarian, this Emmy Award winning documentarian, just reached out to me like 2 years ago, and he was asking me about flavors, and I just sent him a bunch of papers and I just I was chatting with him like we had like little sessions every so often, like once a year. It was really like or like every 6 months, and he'd be like, "What's this about flavor?" And then eventually they came out and was like, let's just interview him. Like let's just like go ahead and make this documentary. So hopefully that will come out soon. So yeah. I think this is very appropriate. Making it and faking it. That's how I feel. Is like it's been sort of my trajectory is like, sometimes you really do have to fake it, right? You have to kind of put on front. And then that isn't about lying, right? Like I'm very upfront about my skills and abilities, but it's almost like if you just come in with enough confidence, even if you're clear, like, hey, like this is something I'll probably have to learn and something that requires some, you know, cobbling together. Eventually you'll make it, and that's sort of my story for the last 6 years. But yeah, thank you for attending. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. And again, thanks for the opportunity. And I'll turn it back to you, Asia.
Wow. Thank you so much, Brian. I know you and I have talked offline before this, but that presentation and the way that you gave us little insights into your decision making at every single point in your linear or non-linear career path was so helpful. I think especially for newcomers to the field, but even people who have been in the field or been in the industry for a while and want to redirect. Um, yeah, you are very in tune with yourself, and I think that allows you to show up as your whole self to whatever the next chapter is, whether it's consulting, whether it's being a food scientist, whether it's doing chemistry or not. So it really allows you to be nimble when you're in tune with yourself. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I have a few questions of my own, but I do just want to remind everyone that we have lots of time to have Brian answer any of your questions. Please feel free to drop them in the Q&A chat, and we can go ahead and call them out and read them and answer them. So please do that. While you folks are maybe thinking of some questions, I was curious if, because you mentioned you're kind of growing your team and where are right now in terms of running your consulting business. And I'm curious, could you give us like a day in your life? Like what is a day? Maybe there's not a typical day, but what might a day look like in Brian's life right now?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, it does seem like every day has its own uniqueness, which is probably good for me because again, I have very low attention span, so I always need like new things to put my attention on. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the times, I mean, it can be as simple as just I'll start my day looking at my email, just trying to go through a lot of the questions that people have, clients, and that so on and so forth. And then, a lot of my time I spend on marketing actually nowadays. So I'll talk to a number of different journalists and, email them or we'll have a chat and then see if I can provide, quotes or expertise on a question they have about food science, right? If they have like an article about, for example, I did one on Rolling Stone about raw milk. And so like the author needed someone to, actually qualify the answers that she was giving. So it'll be something like that. And then, maybe I'll go and, start putting together some documents. A lot of the documents I put together are proposals. So clients will come, we'll have a meeting, we'll chat, I'll discuss like what it is that they're doing, and then, you know, try to figure out how to solve it. We'll put it together a proposal. And over time, I've just sort of learned exactly like how long things have taken. In the beginning, I was just making stuff up, but now I'm like, okay, this is how long it takes to do these sort of things. So now I can like calculate, and it's nice because it makes more sense economically than it did before. And then I'll basically split that project into different components and have my different team members sort of work out different issues. And really what my position is nowadays is more like a mentor, right? Like I have this body of skills and knowledge, and I try to impart that with people that work with me. I mean, and at the end, I only have so many hours in a day, so it makes more sense for me to sort of help other people improve their abilities than for me to basically do the work myself. But every so often there might be something that someone can't do, and I'll kind of step back in. But for the most part, like everything just sort of gets divided, and it's really nice to be able to do that because I've been doing it long enough where I understand the workflow. And again, things happen all over the place. Like I was telling you today, like I have 3 webinars today, and that was not by design. So, like this just like very spontaneous, kind of matter of fact situations that, I'm kind of a shoot from the hip kind of person. So, which drives my wife kind of crazy because she's like, what kind of like odd, crazy schedule do you have? I'm like, well, it works for me. Like like there's an order here, so I can keep track of it myself.
Definitely. I like to think of it as like organized chaos sometimes, especially if you're in a role where you're building and maintaining at the same
Hmm.
time, which is
Hmm.
kind of what it sounds like you're doing right now while you're, building your team, being a mentor to others, while also maintaining that constant workflow of writing
Yep.
proposals, responding to emails, setting up meetings. So it's really impressive. And not for the faint of heart, because it definitely does take, yeah, time management skills. And again, kind of going back to this concept that you've touched on quite a few times of just knowing yourself and knowing how you work, knowing that
Yes.
you can't, for you at least, you want to be on a project for maybe a certain amount of time, but you want to be able to redirect. You get interested in other things. So that seems to be
Mhm.
a really, this type of work seems to really be good for someone like you or like others who are interested in a lot of different things and constantly learning.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Amazing. I know we actually have kind of a great segue question from Gianna. And this is maybe going back to that time in your career path where you were thinking about going into consulting. And Gianna asked, what made you feel ready to go into consulting? Was there any like skill that you were like, okay, this is refined enough? Or was there a network connection or an achievement you had reached that made you be like, okay, now it's time to just go in and try this consulting thing?
To be honest, it's survival. It's being pushed into a corner. I don't think in any other circumstance had I had like a second possibility, like if for some reason I'd been given a job opportunity, I don't know if I would have done it. But I couldn't get a job. I didn't know what was gonna happen with the future. And I think I just, I got fed up. Um, and it was kind of my own sort of rebelling against the system. I was like, you know what? I can do this myself. And it started earlier. Certainly, like I had an internship at a cheese company during my PhD, and I spent a lot of time sitting in a corner trying to avoid. Um, Basically, they kept asking me to do things that are very, I guess I thought didn't make it a lot of sense, and I kept trying to optimize certain processes. And I was telling them like I think this could actually work, and then they would ignore me because I was an intern. Um, and what it occurred to me was like there is a way to save money here, but they won't listen. So I want to be in a position where people are going to listen. and actually pay me for the advice I'm going to give them. So there was some kind of I realized I was a little disconnected from a traditional workplace or sort of job opportunity. So it was a sort of early on process, and then also with like my PhD, I was also kind of contrarian, and sort of did things my own way. So I knew I was not I knew I was not manageable as an employee. So there was this sort of subtle idea of, yeah, it's probably not going to work out even if I do find a job position. But at the end of the day, I was just put in a corner, and I needed to make money, and I just sort of found my way into it.
Yeah, survival is a good reason to try something new. And that's it's very good to be introspective where you can acknowledge and think about it as like, okay, what about this situation is not vibing well? What is it that I could
Hmm.
be doing differently? And then matching up the job or the role with that.
Hmm.
Being able to give advice and be paid and compensated for it. Um,
Yep. Yep.
Wonderful. I want to actually go to the next question I'm seeing here from Amanda that I think could also kind of feed into this topic that we're talking about in terms of, yeah, consulting, building your clientele. So Amanda says, "Thank you for sharing so candidly about your journey. How do you approach building trust and credibility with clients, especially if you're coming from a non-traditional background?"
Right. Hi, Amanda. Um, she's my friend. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So it took me a long time to get to this point of realizing what it is that builds trust. And I think a lot of it is just relationship, right? It's almost like you're approaching people as if they were your friend, and rather than like a potential client or someone that you're trying to extract money from. I I don't know at what point this became kind of obvious to me, but I would just talk to people, and maybe I overdid it where I just kept sharing information, and not getting paid for it. But I think that was sort of the beginning of trust building, where I was willing to deliver value first, right? Like, and I think that in a business transaction, it can be it can be very cold and calculating, where it's like, how much value can I extract from this scenario, or, from one side or the other, and like, how do like maybe on the other side, how do I maximize my dollars? And I stopped thinking that way. I realized that first of all, it doesn't work for me. I don't like to think in those terms. And second of all, I think it came from what do you call it? Sort of a scarcity mindset, right? Like the scarcity of resources. Like it's thinking, oh, I need to get what's mine. Which, I'm gonna exclude this from like actually getting paid, because it's more of a it's more of a thought process of saying, if this was a person that I knew, and I already implicitly trusted, was part of my friend circle, how would I treat them? And I'd probably just tell them all this stuff, and that's what I do. Um, and so people come away, and I've heard this multiple times. People say like, I there was a lot of information, like, so people feel really good talking to me, and over time it just builds this ongoing relationship. And you know I think there will be a difference between a person that, feels a little tight with money and someone that is willing to be more generous. And I've been able to sort of, I don't know how, honestly, but I've been able to sort of screen out and realize like, oh, there are people who are willing to pay for good advice, right? And those are the people that I like to gravitate towards, because at the end of the day, we can settle the finances on the side, and then just do the thing that we're here to do, which is to discuss, the issues, solve the problems, and just be, I don't know, like there's just constantly this idea of abundance of like, if I help you, you're gonna help people, right? Like if I can help you, make a living, like I've done my job, because then at the end of the day, you'll help me, right? Like there's just sort of this implicit relationship that you can have. And I think that comes out of my experiences at Burning Man, because at Burning Man, there's sort of one of the core tenets is sort of sharing economy, right? Like there's no money transacted. I mean, at the end of the day, there has to be some because you bring resources in, but there's something about being able to be of service first and allowing the world to take care of you because you have been of service, that allows sort of it's like blood. Like blood has to flow, right? It has to go, like that's how our body gets resources. It has to flow from one place to another. If it stops anywhere, if you're too tight with your with what you're sharing, it that's how you end up dying. So
Definitely. You have so many great analogies, honestly. I think I think you had said something earlier on about just as a consultant, almost talking as if you're thinking about talking to a client as if they were a friend. Like, how would I describe this? What would I tell them? I wouldn't hold back in terms of trying to help them. And I think that's a really, really honest and good approach to building that credibility, building that trust, and bringing the humanity back into the business of what you're doing while keeping the goal, the task at hand, but just bringing that human to human connection to the forefront as well, which can sometimes get lost. Yeah, thank you
right.
for sharing that. I want to go to our next question. We have about 8 minutes left. So let's see. I think somebody asked a great question. So it was Max said, thanks for the presentation. So Max is a software engineer looking to career change to alternative proteins or the animal welfare area of work and is curious about if you have any advice for building an impactful career, which I think you've done a really good job of. So maybe just being able to speak a little bit more to how you kind of identified that area of impact for you, and how you decided to just go for it there.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question because, it's a question that relates to your relationship to the world. Because I think, of course, impactfulness, there's two ways about it. There's sort of the objective metric version, and then there's the, subjectively, like how do I feel about this situation or scenario? Um, and I've tended to move more towards the other side because I used to be very metric forward, which I think works great if you're, nonprofit or an organization, but as an individual and as a human, you kind of get lost in the numbers. So I think at some point I was reading, there was a philosopher, a sort of more modern philosopher, that expressed purpose like an onion, right? Like there's going to be layers. Like you'll go through life, and your first like purpose will be very basic. It's like eating and getting food and being taken care of, and playing with toys like you're a kid, right? And then you kind of go into your development, and then your next phase is like doing well in school, and so on and so forth. And so your purpose and sort of impactfulness is going to change over time depending on how you evolve as a human being. And it's more of a question that just needs to keep getting answered rather than, yeah, there's a way to this. Like there's, to me, like I've tried a lot of different ways to sort of arrive at it, and I realize it's just going to be an ongoing question. It's going to be a question mark of your life. Like, what does it mean to be impactful? Like, what does it mean for me to be impactful? And some days it looks like, you know, some, and there were times where it's like, how do I maximize revenue, right? Because I need to live, right? Like that was a purpose. And then once I achieved whatever metric goal that was, I was like, so what's next? And so the next thing became, well, I like teaching, I like mentoring. And so it became this, sort of transition of like how can I help other people sort of develop themselves and become impactful? And that became like a multiplier of impact, right? Like if I can help other people make an impact, then I've sort of served that purpose. But I'm doing it my way. I'm doing it the way that I know how and what really drives me. And I'm sure in 5, 10 years, I'm probably gonna transition to something else as well. So it's less of a how do you do it and more like how do you live it, right? Like it is a question to live. And it's always going to change. And at some point, we'll be 50, we'll be 60, and so on and so forth. And the question of impact will change, right? Like maybe it'll just be singular, right? Maybe it'll just be like, I want to have an impact on like my child or my nephew, right? It could be that simple. Um, but again, and I think that's okay. Sometimes I think or maybe for me, I get caught up in the idea of like quantity. But at the end of the day, you're only one person. So really, you have to focus in on quality as well.
That makes a lot of sense. What you were saying about like the orders of influence that you can have. So, the way that you're able to help one person, whether it's a business, a company, a individual client, and then thinking about the ripple effect that can happen from that. And those are metrics that I think sometimes we're not, or I wasn't thinking about, but you had made a great point of mentorship and coaching and consulting being like really endless, exponential in the way that you're impacting one person and another person impacts another person. So I really like that way of thinking about it as opposed to traditional like numbers and quantitative metrics.
Right, right, right.
Wonderful. Okay, I think we have time to squeeze in one more question. It might be a quick one, but somebody else asked, let's see, I think this might be a great one to end on. So, if you had one piece of advice, I know we've been asking you for a lot of advice for somebody who is an early career food technologist that's looking to grow over the next 5 years or so, thinking about whether they should go to grad school or, just get into the job force, the workforce, or do more of like that self-study, learning and building up your own expertise. Could you give any advice on kind of that decision making, which I know you've had quite a bit of experience doing yourself, and how to inform that process?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's going to be a very personal question for yourself. I think you just make mistakes. Like you just try something and you make a lot of mistakes. I mean, I tried a lot. I've tried so many different things, and I think that helps kind of narrow things down. I think, in fact, I sometimes when I was too successful, that's where I would get complacent. And I think failure kind of it forces you to rethink your values and your priorities and you realize like you don't have unlimited resources, so you sort of have to gravitate towards things that it's okay that some days like yeah you need to pay yourself and pay for your living, and maybe it's not the highest order type of position, but that's the time of your life, and then maybe that gives you it bootstraps your ability to sort of think a little further long term. And I've certainly have done that in many different capacities and ways. uh and some things are just sometimes just life happens, right? But at the end of the day, you can kind of just do sort of an audit of yourself with like, what are your priorities? What do you value? And what's intolerable? I think maybe that's even more so than anything else is what I've learned is completely intolerable for me. And that brings me closer to what I can do and I feel called to do, versus like you're not going to get it right. It makes me think of like relationships, like with partners. Um, you discover what your weaknesses are and your strengths, and then that person's weaknesses and strengths. And the same thing is sort of like with positions. Like maybe something looks really glossy and nice on the outside, but in the end, you're like, that was a lot of work like that, and I don't really, that doesn't feed me. So like, or this is a very humble position, like, and no one would ever think about it, but actually it works really well. And certainly, I think it's easy to get caught up in sort of the detail of it rather than sort of the feel of it. And I think the feel of it is actually, for someone like me who's been trained as a scientist, I actually gut intuition is like a huge thing for me. So
Definitely. I liked that way you phrased it of like do an internal audit. And that might be even like, I feel like that could be a great journal prompt of like what is intolerable for me right now at this phase in my life and really sinking into that because I don't know if that's something that on a at least maybe not on a daily basis, it doesn't come up, but having those kind of audits, whether it's on a monthly period or a biannual period, just sitting down with yourself and really asking those questions, and being
Mhm.
okay with the response because it might mean you have to do something different.
And it's scary. Sometimes it's scary. Sometimes you realize like, oh, that's right. I forgot about that. And like
Yeah.
I buried that down like when I was 5.
Exactly. Well, it has been an absolute treasure being able to pick your brain and learn more about your story. Thank you again. I think we've seen it in the chat, or I've seen it in the chat, so many thank yous and words of gratitude for sharing so candidly, and taking us through your journey. I know you have quite a busy day ahead, so I know we're a little bit over time. Thank you for staying. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Please. Let us know if you have any other requests or topics that you'd love us to discuss on this webinar. We'd love to hear it. You're welcome to email me at asias@gfi.org. And until next time, please take care. Maybe do some internal auditing. And yeah, excited for the next one. Thanks again, Brian.
Thank you, Asia. Really appreciate it.
Bye. Take care.